Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I hope all of you are well and safe. And if you all can hear me, please message me on the chat. Like, just say yes on the chat so that I can start with our introduction for today. Thank you, Visak. Okay, so welcome to the third session of the Back to Basics Workshop 2021, where, as you all know, we're talking about the fundamentals of cleaning and soft FM. As you know, this workshop is being organized by Clean Middle East magazine in association with Reza Hygiene. Just a little about the company before we begin. Reza Hygiene is a one-stop provider of hygiene and cleaning solutions for all industries, especially the food chain, from farm to fork, healthcare, and commerce. Solutions are wide-ranging, innovative, and sustainable, with the company taking a highly responsible approach to chemicals. Reza Hygiene also believes in the importance of empowering cleaning personnel with all the knowledge required to carry out cleaning practices efficiently. Clean Middle East magazine is a 14-year-old publication based in Dubai, UAE. It has been responsible for disseminating information to the cleaning and hygiene industry since its launch in 2008. And I'm Shanti Petiwala, the editor of Clean Middle East magazine. So before we begin, here are some of the rules of the workshop. The workshop comprises 4 sessions spread over 2 months. We already completed session 1 and 2. Today is the third session, and each session is for 2 hours, including questions and answers. The sessions have been spaced out fortnightly, and those attendees who participate in all 4 sessions will be given a say. On the right side, next to where the chat is, you will see a panel where you can type out any question you have in the questions tab. I will take these up during the Q&A session every time the chapter is complete. At any point during the session, we may also call you to interact with Tommy on stage. So if you're interested, whenever we ask the question, you can just say, that you're interested and we'll call you on stage. So take this opportunity, learn and observe and refresh your memory on various aspects of cleaning and FM services. And finally, let me introduce you to our presenter for the Back to Basics workshop. Tommy Taylor is the director at T Taylor Solutions in the UK. He is an accredited ISSA CIMS and ISSA CIE facilitator. He has had extensive experience training cleaning and FM companies in the Middle East and continues to raise standards in cleaning through his own company in the UK called T Taylor Solutions. Tommy has been part of the Clean Middle East family since the last couple of years, and it is our honor to have him conduct this workshop and impart his knowledge and experience to you all across the 4 sessions. So without further ado, I hand over the presentation to Tommy. All the best, everyone. Tommy, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon to you all, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're all well. Thank you for joining me on this third session of 4, where we'll be looking at various topics of understanding chemicals, understanding types of equipment, and having a look at robotics and cobotics. First of all, before we go any further, I'd just like to reiterate where we are in terms of the course information. So today's session is approximately 2 hours long. We will take a short break midway through, a comfort break or just to stretch your legs. I want the session, and I'll try to make the session as interactive as possible. And, I welcome any questions that you may have and to interject anytime you like during this particular course. It's not set up in a way that I'm just going to sit here and preach to you about what potentially could be right or wrong with what you're either doing or not doing. It's a shared experience. And one of the things I picked up from a colleague, 2 colleagues actually, who joined us in this particular format, and I said to them, well, not that I didn't want them to join in, I asked them, well, why were you here? And they said, well, it's to get experience from around the world and see what other people are doing, and just to sort of tap into other people's source of information, which is fine. And I'm happy for you to do that at any moment you want. But what I would ask you to do is don't sit there in silence. If you've got a question, if you've got a comment to make about something I've said or I've not said or you want to hear, then please interject with me. I'm happy to take any questions at any time you like. If you feel that you are not confident or you don't want to, or you might think of something after the session, then fine. What you can do is email Shanti, and she will send me the question, and I will try and answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, next slide, please, Shanti. So what we've got here is a little disclaimer. I know it sounds a bit legalese, but what I want you to understand is that, you know, I'm just going through the sessions in terms of giving you information that you might find useful, information that you might not find useful. But one thing I am not doing is guaranteeing your success by saying you must do this or you must buy that. That's not the way the session goes, really. The session, as I said, is interactive. It's about me sharing some of my knowledge with you and your colleagues sharing their knowledge with all of us. So this is not a guarantee for success in terms of what I'm saying to you. But what I would like you to do is be able to pick up some information, enable that you can move forward successfully within your businesses. Next slide. So this is the starting topic for today, understanding chemicals. But before we do that, can I just go back to session 2 and just remind you the topics that we went through in session 2. And what I would ask you to do is, if you have any questions that you need to pose for me in terms of the last particular session, I'll be grateful to take them. If you could just put them in the chat and email them to or text them to Shanti, and she will come back to me. So what we done, we looked at RAMs, we looked at how they work and constructing them. I apologize, it was slightly disjointed last time, the way I put them together, but hopefully you got the information in terms of how to put together a set of RAMs. We looked at cost data, cost assessments, and training records, which are all important in their own ways. We also looked at the importance of training and developing your own staff. And to be perfectly frank, all 4 sessions that we're having here really revolves around the end game, which is training. No matter what you've got, whether you've got the right chemicals, you've got the right disinfectant, you've got the right equipment, the right machinery, the end game for us within the cleaning industry is always to make sure that you train and you retrain. I can't stipulate that enough. We looked at the right kind of training environment and measuring outcomes. So measuring outcomes is really about looking to make sure that the member of staff is doing what you've asked them to do and in the manner that you've asked them to do it. And that's all useful. There's no point just training people and sending them out and hoping they'll get it right. You know, there has to be an element of you engaging with them, watching to see what they're doing, or looking at their supervisor to see if they're doing it correctly. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in problems. Last but not least, we looked at personal hygiene, personal grooming, about hand washing. We know how important the emphasis now is on personal hygiene now, and on people hand washing to prevent or reduce the risk of COVID infection, etc. We looked at dress code, although I have no formal example in terms of what the dress code should be for a particular organization. What you should be looking at is, you know, are people dressed in the manner that you want them to be dressed? Are they wearing the right uniform? Is the uniform clean? Is it correct for the job that they want to do in terms of, even in terms of your PPE? Is it the correct PPE? There's no point giving them a pair of vinyl gloves if they're working in a heat environment and the vinyl gloves are not going to work. So, you know, there's sort of things you need to look at. And what your expected standards of your staff. Now, we all have standards. You know, there's a number of us on this chat forum today, on this webinar today, and we can probably come up with maybe, you know, 10, 15, 20 different types of what we regard as a right standard to actually perform a particular task, a cleaning task. But what we should be looking at, and I say to people, is not the outcome. Don't look at what it's like when it's finished. Look at the journey. How did the staff get there? Did they have the right materials? Did they use the equipment correctly? Is the environment right for them to actually deliver that task? They can get from A to B, not a problem. It's just like driving a car. You know, you can get from one location to another, but there's different routes to getting there. But is there a right route for them to get there and to maybe perform the task correctly and safely? So let's look at today's topic. So we're starting off with understanding chemicals.
Tommy, can I interrupt you here for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Ravi Gupta has a small question from this previous session.
Sure.
So he basically wants to know the key difference between modules of the BICS program and features of ISSA. And where can he refer to? What can he refer to if you can assist him on that?
Right. Okay. I'm not formally in a position to answer for either organisation in terms of what they do, but I'll try and give you the best I can. So please don't hold me down and say that Tommy said, because I'm no longer a BICS associate, so I had to be careful about what I say. So what I need to do is give you my experience of where I was at that particular time. So the major difference between the two organisations is that BICS are very heavily into training in terms of hands-on skills training. Now, for the people that we are working with, and I don't need to use the term people derogatory, but if you understand it in context, for the people that we're working with, for most of them, it's best to have hands-on skills training where you're standing in front of them, you can demonstrate to them and show them what needs to be done, and then they go off and they repeat what you've shown them in the long run. Where on ISS run their model a lot on what we're doing now. Really, they're running their model on Zoom or Teams, etc., etc. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but a lot of their courses are reaching out to sort of more middle to senior managers in terms of that, and they don't, as far as I know, at this current moment in time, they don't do any hands-on skills training related to the cleaning industry. So if I look at the big scenario and I talk you through that briefly in terms of where I was and where they are now, is that as most of you know, BICS have the steps where you have to have your license to practice first, which gives you some basic skills that you would need to be able to move forward on other skills. And some of what I'm talking about today in terms of chemicals and equipment and stuff will be useful for you moving forward in terms of that scenario. Behind that, you will have other skills which you can demonstrate to your staff in terms of the equipment that you use, the locations that you use, and then what you do is you train and you assess them. That's the basic principle of the way that BICS work, and it has worked for years. And for most of you that have been involved, you would understand how successful it's been. But its success really is only based on the fact that as an organization or as an individual, if you train that particular member of staff, if that particular member of staff on the day has passed that particular module, what you do need to do is follow up. You need to observe, you need to retrain where possible, and you need to tweak, because it's a bit like, and I'll go back again, it's a bit like the analogy of driving a car. So when I learned to drive several years ago, you done everything correctly. You drove within speed limit, you braked when you had to brake, you slowed down when you had to slow down, you didn't break traffic lights, you didn't run through traffic lights, etc., etc. But once you got your license, and I'm not saying I'm doing this, I'm just giving you an example, but once you get your license, your whole outlook is different. You tend to cut corners, you drive at 30 miles an hour when you're supposed to be only driving at 20 miles an hour, stuff of that nature. And cleaning, in terms of the training that we do, is much the same. What we tend to do is we train the staff, we assess them in a controlled environment, and then we let them out in their own environment and we let them get on with it. Now, what we have to understand, and I don't want to label it too much, what we have to understand is that what you train the staff is the absolute in terms of that controlled environment. When you send them out into their working environment, it's slightly different. They have to adapt that working environment. But what they should do, and what you should be encouraging them to do, is to work within the parameters of what you show them and what they've been trained and what they've been assessed. Not every situation is going to be the same. When you take them from a situation which is artificial, because you've got the right floor, you've got all the right equipment, they've got everything they need to conduct that training. But when they go onto their workplace, you need to make some allowances that things will change. You know, when the dust control mopping a floor in a training environment, they haven't got 300 or 400 people walking over what they're doing. Same thing for mopping. So that's really the difference. And I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't like to endorse or say that I've got a preference one over the other. I think that both organisations, in terms of the cleaning industry, where we see it, have their places in the marketplace. For lower level staff, your supervisors, your cleaning operatives, then the big scenario in terms of skills training is useful, and it's a good tool to have. for more sort of senior management training in terms of what ISS are looking at, sort of auditing. They're doing things like estimating and stuff like that. That's slightly different. So I think, Ravi, your question, I understand. I hope I've answered your question, but you had to treat the two organisations slightly differently in terms of what they deliver, how they deliver, and what the expectations are. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Tommy. I'm sure you have. It was pretty clear.
Okay. Anything else for me, Shanti?
No, nothing else as of now.
Okay. Excuse me. So some considerable years ago, when I actually started in the clean industry, I started off traditionally in a role in the UK, which they call was a caretaking role. So I worked in a school, and part of my role within that school was to carry out some cleaning processes, which generally more than often were cleaning of the toilets, stuff of that nature. And then during the day, we would do pick-up cleans and stuff of that nature. Anyway, where my interest grew was back in the 80s. I went to college, and we had two successful cleaning colleges here in London, where we learned about cleaning and the different aspects of cleaning, whether it be chemicals, equipment, etc. Now, one of the things I picked up was in terms of chemicals and understanding chemicals. And one of the things that I found that's been lacking within our industry, not only in your region but in Europe, one is people's understanding of what chemicals use in certain situations. Now, the COVID scenario has really sort of brought everything to a fore in terms of what is meant by cleaning and the outcomes of that particular cleaning and what chemicals we should use. And you all probably know that back last year in 2020, around sort of March, April, May time, there was all sorts of ingenious chemicals came out of the woodwork. What you can use, what can clean COVID, what can disinfect up to 30 days at a time, and stuff of that nature. There's all sorts of stuff going on, and some people, for want of a better phrase, sort of fell into the trap of thinking, yeah, you can disinfect a surface and it will last for 30 days. Despite the fact that maybe 1,000 people have touched that touch point, etc., etc. So what we have learned, and some of you would have probably learned, is actually some of these things are not working in the way that we want them to work. Some of these things are not right for our organization in terms of the way we do things. Some of the basic things were missed out. So when we clean, what do we mean by cleaning? So before 2020, the main things about cleaning was to remove dirt and grease and contaminants on the surface. There was no mention of COVID. There was no mention of SARS or anything of that nature. We just cleaned, and we were cleaning for aesthetics rather than cleaning for disinfection purposes, except where it was high risk in hospitals or anything of that nature. In food prep businesses, you had to clean, but you were using different kinds of sanitizers and disinfectant agents and stuff. But the basics behind cleaning is the removal of dirt and soil from the surface. But now we're talking about removing contaminants as well in terms of COVID. Now, what I've got on the screen are just really 4 basic types of chemicals, not brand names, but actually chemicals in terms of with their structures. So we've got detergents, for instance. Now, during this past year, my view, and only my view, and I'm quite happy for some of you to disagree with me, during this particular COVID process, detergents have been the key cleaning agent in all of this. Not the disinfectants, not the sanitizers, not the virucidal cleaners, not the bactericidal cleaners, detergents. Because in order that we had actually explored and made sure that we were cleaning the surfaces correctly and we were removing as much bacteria from the surface, what we should have been doing is a 2-stage clean. And the first stage should have been your detergent. Right? So neutral detergent, pH of 7, quite easily done. Not hard work. But for a lot of organizations, they missed that out. For organizations and people that would set themselves up for business and said they were doing COVID cleans, that was one of the problems that they had. They never cleaned the surface first. They went straight into disinfection. which is totally the wrong way of doing it. So what we're looking for in terms of detergent, so we're looking for something that removes dirt and dissolves grease on the surface. So grease can be as simple as body fats. So, body fats from your fingers where you're touching, etc., anywhere part that touches the body, as well as fats that may come from food, etc., etc. In terms of doing that, it has a surfactant built into it, which allows it to break down the dirt, allows it to break down grease, and makes the cleaning process easier. Now, as I said, and I've alluded to, it's not a one-step process. This is the first step of two that you should be looking at. So for me, using a detergent is the first and most important step when we come to cleaning. Not anything else, because this is all the preparation. This is the foundation of what we do. So again, if I can put it in much simpler terms, this is like painting. If you prime the surface first before you put on your top coat, your paint will last longer. If you don't prime the surface and you put a gloss paint or another paint on top of the surface without it being primed, you will find it won't last as long. And that's as simple as the way I can put the whole scenario in terms of using the detergent. So what you should be looking for in your detergent, that is it's got active ingredients and it's a pH of 7. Okay, now the detergent will help to lift the dirt and grease on the surface to start with, which disinfectants don't. Disinfectants disinfect. Please, for those of you that are new to the industry, try to understand the difference between what's a disinfectant and what's a detergent. Okay, so it's crucial in the killing of any form of bacteria that a detergent is used first, and then you can follow up with whatever you have after that. Okay, so before I move on, are there any questions related to detergents in terms of what we're looking for, or what we haven't got in terms of what we're looking for in terms of the whole cleaning process? Are there any questions related to that before I move on?
We'll just wait for half a minute, Tommy, to see if anyone has any questions.
Okay.
There's a comment from Ian, who's from Reza Hygiene, and he says that, so many people in the Middle East use chlorine and Dettol in toilets, lifts, and kitchens to clean, and instead of using detergents. So I think that's an observation that we've seen across.
Yeah, and the thing is, Ian, I just say I can't stipulate enough the importance of using a good detergent before they actually start to do a disinfection clean.
If I may ask, very, very layman question, but what is the difference between, say, a Dettol liquid or Dettol solution and a detergent, like chemically? Like, what is the composition difference?
Oh, blimey, now you're asking.
No, nothing really advanced, but just for for us to understand, the difference. That's
okay. So really, a disinfectant, it means what it says. So what it's doing is it's removing harmful bacteria or viruses from the surface.
correct.
Well, a detergent will do that, but it won't do that to the same degree. So basically what they do is they work hand in glove. So again, Dettol is when you have to read the label carefully. If it says it's a disinfectant, that's all it does. If it says it's a cleaner disinfectant, then what it will do is it will have some active ingredients within that disinfectant to be able to clean. So it will have some form of surfactant which will help you to clean that particular surface. However, as I said, a disinfectant on its own will not remove dirt and grease from the surface. It will help to kill bacteria, but it won't remove the dirt and grease from the surface.
Okay. I don't think there are any questions. If there are, take it across later.
Okay.
Okay, there are questions.
Let me move on to a sanitizer. So in terms of sanitizing, so sanitizing could be described in different ways, but if we look at it in terms of a chemical reaction, as opposed to just using steam or anything of that nature. So what a sanitizer has, and a bit what you were asking me, Shanti, without using trade names, is it's a combination of a detergent and disinfectant together. That's what a sanitizer is.
Okay.
And Therefore, it does help to remove dirt, it does help to dissolve grease on the surface, and it will reduce bacteria levels. Now, one of the things that we found, and most of you will see, is that with most commercial sanitizers, disinfectants, you will not see, in many cases, you will not see it will kill 100% COVID-19. Doesn't do that. Okay. Anything that does that obviously needs to be tested, and they need to make sure they can back up their claim. In order for you to kill COVID-19 on the surface or any other bacteria on the surface, as I said, you need two-stage cleaning. However, sanitizer does help you out in that sense of the word, because a sanitizer gives you both. It helps to clean and it also disinfects at the same time. What kind of sanitizer you use and the brand you use, I don't know, and I wouldn't like to sort of point you in one direction to the other. But it's always good to have a conversation with your supplier over what you feel is best for you and your organization moving forward. But the one thing that you have to understand when you're using a sanitizer is that the detergent element of it is diluted down, as opposed to using just detergent on its own. All right, so you won't have that detergent reaction in the same manner that if you've used just a detergent on its own. So again, if I was in that particular position, I wouldn't rely on just a sanitizer on its own. I would always still use a detergent first of all to follow up. Now, when I say use detergent, and again, and what I found is during my days when I was training skills, etc., was how much overuse there was of chemicals, especially a detergent. Now, if you've got a good quality detergent, you would find that you'd only need about 5 milliliters per 5 liters to dilute in a bucket for it to work properly. But sometimes the way you see people drop it into a bucket and drop it into water, and the amount, the quantity and the levels that they use are completely wrong. Now, one of the things that we need to think about in terms of understanding how chemicals work, and if we go back to a healthcare environment, years ago, they used to have rotation. So they used to rotate wards. So i.e., what you would have is you'd use a chemical that have 4 wards. One ward will be dormant and be left there ready to be used. The other 3 wards will be cleaned with a particular chemical, disinfectant, detergent, etc. But then after maybe 6 months or even a year sometimes, they would change that chemical, because what they were finding was that the bacteria cultures on the surface will get used to a particular chemical. So again, let me try and put this in more simpler terms. It's like using an antibiotic. If your doctor gives you an antibiotic for whatever ailment you've got, he or she will give you a course of, say, 5 days antibiotic. If you only use that antibiotic for 4 days, you would probably find that you're not going to clear up the infection that you may have. Similar with your cleaning process. If you don't use enough, i.e. the right dilution ratios for your chemicals, you will probably find, yes, you are cleaning the surface, but you're not cleaning it as efficiently as you should do, because you're not using the right quantity. Again, if you overuse it, you will find that in certain situations your surface will become dull, your surface will become lifeless, and you will find that you will leave detergent on the surface, which again will then pick up other forms of bacteria, other forms of contaminants on this particular surface. So it's important, and I try to stress the importance of following the manufacturer's label. I naively enough, when I first started in cleaning, I was so naive to actually believe the reason why they put dilution rates on was so you can use more, so you can spend more with your manufacturer and your suppliers. But we all know that's not quite right. That's not true. And it's important to use the right quantity. So when using a sanitizer, as I said, it's important to understand, yes, a sanitizer does have certain cleaning elements within that particular chemical, and it will have a sanitizing stroke removal of bacteria level within that chemical. However, again, I will stress, don't use it as a one-size-fits-all. Always go back to using your detergent first of all, and then you follow up with your sanitizer. Okay, any questions up to now?
There were a couple of questions that came in.
Yeah.
Yeah. There were a couple of questions that came in after the detergents part, just before you started. Number one is, Case, I got your message that you have several audio problems. Can you try and change your browser? Maybe that will help you, because otherwise it seems to be clear across the board. To go back to the question, Tommy, Mohammed Hassan Shahzad asks whether the category of a cleaner is the same as that of a detergent or a surfactant.
Can you say that again for me again, please, Nancy?
There is, he says here, I believe another category is cleaner, or is it covered under detergent and surfactant?
A clean? No, there's no. in terms of chemical categories, cleaner is not a category.
Okay.
So I assume that what he's saying is a detergent. That's really it. A cleaner is actually, or cleaner or cleaning is the actual process. It's not actually a chemical as such.
Okay. We also have a question from Rabi,
Yeah.
who has gone a little more ahead of what we are talking, but he says that, do you recommend ATP Hygiene tools for washrooms also during the COVID-19 period, or is it only recommended for healthcare and food?
Right. Okay. So he's gone. Yeah, he's gone a little bit. He's gone a little bit further than I've anticipated. Right. In terms of, as I said, in terms of hygienic cleaning, I think that you have to understand your environment, and you have to understand your client's requirements in your environment. So what you will find is that in a lot of healthcare scenarios, you will find that there's a lot of chlorine being used. Now, I'm not pro or against chlorine when it comes to cleaning. Not a problem. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. As I said, as a cleaning professional, I would always prefer, regardless if it's chlorine or not, I would always prefer the two-step cleaning. This is detergent, first of all, followed up by your recommended chemical, whether it be a chlorine-based chemical or just an ordinary disinfectant. So I think that what I would say to my colleague is that you have to judge each thing on it, each scenario on its merit, and because there's no one size fits all. In terms of using chlorine-based chemicals in say, for instance, in education and places like that, I'd be very careful, especially if it's not used properly, especially if you're getting residue left on surfaces and stuff of that nature, then it can be quite hazardous. So I would use each scenario and take each scenario differently in terms of what they're doing. But as I said, I can't stress enough, always go down the two-stage rule. Detergent clean first of all, and then you follow up with whatever process you're going to use after. You will find that your cleaning will be more effective. The ability to remove bacteria from a surface will be more effective if you do it in that particular manner.
Thank you, Tommy.
Okay.
Another question from Ian Watson is, is a chlorine-based or a quat-based detergent best for COVID if it's a simple spray and wipe?
Excuse me. This again, as I pointed out, really, there's no one chemical that I know of, and maybe the audience could tell me different. There is no one chemical at this present moment can actually hold their hand up and say, if used on its own, will kill the COVID virus. And as I said, I'm quite happy for somebody to sort of come with and challenge me and tell me differently. But so there's no one particular chemical. If you're going to use if you're going to use a chlorine base, again, that's fine. The actual content of it is fine, but it's the application that makes a difference. Now, if you've got a spray bottle application, and i.e. you're walking around and you're cleaning touch points and stuff of that nature, then yes, either of them will be okay. But what you have to be careful of is that it may not kill all the bacteria or the virus that's on that particular surface. You have to be very, very clear on that. It is not one size fits all. And as I said, I'm quite happy for someone to say, yes, this has been scientifically proven and it's been registered and we do have a one-stop cleaning agent that will clean all surfaces and remove COVID. I'm quite happy to do that. But at the moment, as you see for most suppliers, if you look at TV adverts of disinfectant, etc., most of them will, all of them will say 99.9. It would never say 100%.
Yes. Okay. Um, so Tricky Dawood asks, if we're using sanitizers, will it be enough to clean and disinfect? I think you've already said that it does both jobs, but it's better
Yes.
to do a two-stage cleaning
Yeah,
process.
yeah, it will do both jobs, and it will do both jobs. And but what we have to remember is that when you've got a sanitizing agent, the ratio to disinfectant to detergent is greater as a disinfectant than it is for a detergent. So the detergent will become less effective depending on the surface it's cleaning. So as I said, it's fine. It's fine to use, and I'm not advocating saying to anybody here, don't use a sanitizer. All I'm saying is that be careful how you use it, and it's the application, it's the journey. To use your detergent first, then your sanitizer or your disinfectant afterwards.
Okay. Tricky also asks, how much quantity do you recommend to clean 1 square meter of, I assume, sanitizer or any?
No, that would again, that would depend on manufacturer's instructions.
Yeah.
Again, it would be very unwise for me to say use this, use that. It will really depend on the dilution ratio that the manufacturer lays down. And one of the things that you can try for your own benefit is do a swab test. So if you've got an ATP reader, do a swab test. So what you do is clean a surface with just detergent, get a reading from it and see what it's like. Do a surface with just sanitizer or bacterial agent or disinfectant and see what your reading is like. And then do a reading based on a two-stage clean and see what your reading is like, and you'll get a good idea of what it's all about. But the problem that we've got, and one of the problems that we've got in our marketplace at the present moment in time, is that there are some organizations, and I'm not saying this happens in your region, there are some organizations which are claiming to deliver a disinfected or a sanitized surface, but without any evidence. They're not actually doing the test. They're not doing a culture test to actually sort of give a reading. So nobody really knows. Yes, they'll use it. They'll use their fogging implement, whatever the case may be, but they're not taking a reading. So they can't actually put their hands on their heart and say, yes, this is the way it's worked. This is what we've done. And we've cleaned your surfaces, and it's relatively clean in terms of removing bacteria or a virus from a surface.
Thank you, Tommy. Yes, I think we can continue.
Okay, so let's look at disinfectant. So a disinfectant, its primary job is to remove bacteria from a surface. That's its primary role, as opposed to cleaning. A disinfectant does not clean in the true sense of the word. All it does, it reduces and removes bacteria from a surface. Okay, as I said before, this should be used after using a detergent solution. So we generally, up until again before this particular scenario with COVID, disinfectants were very rarely used in the general cleaning environment. So you never really use a disinfectant in office environment or anywhere of that nature. What we tended to use them, we used them in places like gymnasiums, we used them in food prep areas, they were used extensively, but we never really started using them into general cleaning environment until last year when we had the COVID scenario. So the idea about, and I think that in terms of the UAE and Saudi, I know that Dettol is a big name over there in terms of what's used. Commercially, I don't know, but I know that domestically, Dettol is a tried and trusted name that people use. And again, as I said, there is no problem in using a disinfectant, but what we had to do is make sure that it's used for the purpose it was made for. Now, if we look at, for instance, a food counter or a table where someone's been eating food, etc., try it. Try using your detergent to remove the food deposits from the table, and then try just using your disinfectant. You will see there's a different outcome. you'll probably have to work 2 or 3 times as hard to remove any food waste from a particular surface, because a disinfectant doesn't really have the active ingredients to break down grease or fat. So that's where the problems lie in terms of using disinfectant. Now, using disinfectant in a lot of cases, unless the manufacturer's label says so, you would use it to warm to hand hot water, and that's an active ingredient. It will help. It will help to remove deposits from the surface. Generally, and what we're talking about here is when we're talking about viral spores or bacterial spores, we're talking about things we can't see. Okay, and that's one of the problems that we have within our cleaning regime. We can't see, that the things that harm us most are the things that we cannot see when we clean, right? So we need to make sure that when we're using our disinfectant, we use it properly. Going back to the previous question, it needs to be used in accordance to the manufacturer's instructions, otherwise it won't work properly. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's chlorine based, whether it's quartz, whether it's it's got a surfactant in it. It doesn't matter. If you don't use it right, then you're going to have a problem. Again, too much disinfectant on the surface will create problems in the long run. Not enough, you're not going to remove enough bacteria. So it's always wise to use manufacturer's instructions. Now, one of the things that I've always found when I've conducted training and when I've been with people is the overuse of hot water, which does really confuse me. So if you're mopping a floor, for instance, and you put your water into your bucket and you're using hot water, and then you add your chemical to that water, how long do you think it's going to stay at that temperature? It's not. By the time you start mopping, if you're doing 100 meters of floor, well, it's clearly obvious that the water is not going to be as hot when you started from your starting point to where you ended at your end point. So you have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of hot water in that particular instance? And in my view, there's no purpose, because you can't keep the water hot enough. Even in situations where people have told me, and again, I don't understand the rationale behind it, that they've diluted the chemical down into a spray bottle using warm to hot water. It serves no purpose. The water cools down. So by the time you're using it on multiple surfaces, it's going to be cold anyway. So why start off with warm to hot when you could just start off with cold and you're using it in the right manner? So one of the arguments that I've always had is that some staff will use a chemical based on their own personal knowledge and what they think is right and what they think is wrong, and they'll go off into a tangent and sort of use the chemical the wrong way. Please, in most cases, if you're using a disinfectant agent, use it following the manufacturer instructions. If the manufacturer instructions says to you use warm to hot water, then you're only going to be able to use it on a limited amount of surfaces, because, as I said, it starts to cool down. So what happens when you get to your, an hour later, it's going to be cold. So it doesn't make much sense. So read the manufacturer's label and use it accordingly. So that's one of the key things you need to do. And again, if we touch on what I said last week, that's the sort of thing that you should be putting in your COSH assessment, making it clear, only use with cold water, or only use with hot water, but use it up to so much, and give a time span, whether you say for 15 minutes, whether you say for 20 minutes, give a time span. But when you write your COSH assessment, you need to give clear guidance and instructions. So one of the other things that's been a problem recently, and again, I would like some comments back if you have any, is when using a disinfectant, when using a sanitizer, what about dwell time? Have you read the label enough? Have you read it properly? Now, some disinfectants and some sanitizers and some bactericidal agents, they are not wipe on, wipe off. They are actually, you apply and you leave. And you leave, and they may say leave for 10 minutes, leave for 20 minutes, what the case may be. And then it will say to you, either use hot soapy water to remove, or what the case may be. But dwell time has been something that's missed out big time when we've done recent cleaning. And again, the outcome will be different. If you if you don't leave enough time for the disinfectant or the agent to work on the surface, you won't get anywhere. It won't do you any good. You remove some bacteria, but not as much as you think you're going to remove. So again, dwell time is really, really key to what needs to be done in terms of going through. So please, I can't stress enough, use manufacturer's instructions where appropriate. If you're unsure in terms of what the manufacturer said, what he or she has said, if you're not sure about the application and how it works, then go back to them, ask your supplier, is this right? Should we use? Can we use? Etc. Where possible, use a detergent first, followed up with a sanitizer, followed up with a sanitizer. Are there any questions to this point?
Lots of questions.
Right, okay.
Okay, so Muhammad Hassan Shahzad asks, earlier there was a belief that viruses are not killed by disinfectants as they focus on bacterial load. Now after COVID, the claim is that disinfectants are also capable of killing viruses. Is there any change in the intended purpose of the term disinfectant in terms of reduction of bacterial plus virus load, in your viewpoint?
No, there's been no change. I think that for us as an industry, excuse me, for us as an industry, especially in certain scenarios, as I said before, in food prep, in health and hygiene, in gymnasiums, there shouldn't have been a change. There should be no change in the focus on what we should have done in an environment when we're disinfecting. What should have changed, and to say again, this is a personal view, what should have changed is the application. It's the journey. How do we actually get to clean that surface? Are we doing it properly? Have we prepped it properly? Have we removed all visible soil from the surface properly? Just using a disinfectant is not going to be just enough. Okay, regardless of what anybody says to me, it's not enough. Just using a sanitizer in terms of this whole COVID scenario is not enough. It helps, but it's not enough. So that's the only way I can answer that particular question. As the key phrase now that we use within our industry, and I think I've said it before, that we're not cleaning now for aesthetics. We're not cleaning because it looks nice. We're not cleaning because it looks shiny. We're cleaning for our health. So we need to ensure that what we do correctly, and we do it properly, and we do it in a timely manner.
Thank you, Tommy. There's a question from Nadeem Khan who says that, is there any chemical with 3-in-1, with a 3-in-1 solution of cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfection?
I can't answer that, to be perfectly frank. I can't answer that particular scenario. But to be honest with you, no. And what I said is the sanitizer. Remember, the sanitizer is the go-to if you need to go to in terms of an easy fashion, is a go-to rather than having to use a detergent and disinfectant. So the sanitizer, remember, has both active ingredients for using it as a detergent, and it also has active ingredients for using it as disinfectant. So if you're looking for a one-size-fits-all, then go for a good sanitizer. If you're quite happy to go for a 2-stage clean, go for a good detergent agent, which is got a pH of 7, against a sanitizer or a disinfectant.
Yes. Okay, there are 2 questions which I think you've sort of answered earlier on.
Okay.
Fuad Al-Najjar asks, what about chlorine dioxide disinfectant compared to other types of disinfectants? Is it effective against the COVID virus?
Yes, it is effective if you're using the right chemical. So if I say, for instance, in the healthcare service here, they use a lot of, for cleaning, they use a lot of chlorine tablets, which bleach based, which is fine. It has a detrimental effect in terms of its long-term use on the staff if they're not protected properly. But what you should be careful of is just don't use it for the sake of using it. Use it in conjunction with something. If you prepare your surface properly by using a neutral detergent properly, first of all, you will find you won't need to use as much chlorine-based cleaner afterwards. So that's all I can say.
And also, are quaternary ammonium disinfectants more preferred to use in hospital premises? This is from Abdul Aziz Hussain.
No, again, I can't answer for your region, but in this region here in the UK, no, the prominent chemical to use within the healthcare environment is a chlorine based or bleach based chemical.
Okay. Um, Temperature, Tricky says, I think it's a comment saying the temperature of water plays a major role in the effectiveness of most detergents. In my case, if we suspend the use of hot water, it will automatically affect the quality of cleaning. Absolutely. Okay.
Um, yeah. Again, as I said, I think that if the chemical that they're using prescribes hot water, then that's fine. But the key bit, and I can only stress this, the key bit is how long and to what temperature does the detergent or the disinfectant become ineffective. So, if you're using hand hot, so i.e. you're using something at 60 degrees, etc., it's hand hot, then without a doubt, within 5 or 10 minutes, then that could be reduced to something like 50 plus degrees. Is the chemical still effective at 50 degrees as it is at 60? So that's all I can say. And I think that, you have to read the manufacturer's instructions. Most manufacturers, if not all, they've already done their scientific research. They've already done their research into how effective their chemical will be in certain situations. And for me, most of the time, you will find that most sanitizers, most disinfectants, etc., are prescribed to use in cold water, not hot water.
Okay. Okay. Why is hydrogen peroxide fumigation recommended by infection control department while dealing with critical care patients? Is what Jamil Ahmad Khan asks.
That sounds a bit of a loaded question. um, in terms of healthcare, I can only try to give a broad answer in terms of this one. I've worked in the healthcare environment before in terms of trying to instigate training and procedures for staff within a healthcare environment. Now, as I said before, chlorine-based cleaners, fine, not a problem. If they're used correctly, that's not a problem. I think that you had to be careful, and again, that will come from your cost assessment and your cost details. You have to be careful when you're using it around a third party, okay? Because some people don't like the smell. If it's not removed from the surface properly, then you could have a problem. If it becomes crystallized on the surface because you've used too much of it and it becomes a powdered format, that also becomes a problem. So, but one of the things that I found in terms of healthcare, the best way to always deal with this is to work with the infection control professionals. They are the ones that they have that knowledge. They have a lot of that knowledge that we don't have on a day-to-day basis. They're the people that I think you should work with. You talk to them, you find out their views on things, you explore in terms of what they want. So if they're prescribing a certain chlorine-based chemical to use, then fine. Find out about it, research about it, make sure your cost assessment is correct. But I wouldn't, in terms of that kind of environment, I wouldn't go in with this sort of how do I say? I wouldn't go in where you're telling them what to do, and you're remonstrating with them and saying, well, my way is the best way. I think that in terms of healthcare, you need to be very careful. In most situations, you have to be very careful, but I think you have to be very careful when you've got patients lying in bed. You've got to be very careful that you don't overuse the chemical when you've got patients lying in the bed, because again, the smell could give them a problem. In certain cases, you're not going to be able to ventilate that particular area, so you can't open any windows, you can't leave any doors open. So I think that there has to be some sort of careful research and agreement in terms of the procedure going forward. But again, I can't and I wouldn't sit here and say this is the best thing to use, or don't use this particular chlorine-based chemical. I think you have to take each scenario on its merit and listen to the infection control professionals, because they've got, in terms of what to use chemical-wise, they've got a lot more experience than us. What we've got in terms of our experience is how do we deliver it, but they have the experience in terms of what needs to be delivered, and that's where the conversation should come in.
Thank you, Tommy. We have, I think, 3 more questions.
Sure, no problem.
One is, chlorine is different from chlorine dioxide. Do you have any comments on that? Like, what kind of information can you give our audience about the difference between the two?
I can't give any specific information, to be perfectly frank. Excuse me. I can't give any specific instances, and because I think it would be wrong for me to give out that kind of information, because I'm not proficient in terms of the different categories and what can be used and what shouldn't be used in a particular scenario. So in this particular instance, I'm going to have to decline to answer, because I'm not fully au fait to give an answer that's going to be satisfactory to all parties.
That's okay, Tommy. Thank you. But they are 2 different elements, right? They're 2
Yes.
completely different entities. Okay. Sorry. Is there any recommendations
In terms of
for faded carpets by soft drink, or is there any recommendation to regenerate the color
of a carpet?
Yes. So if there's a carpet that's stained with a soft drink or something, what kind of chemical can be used to refresh the color is what I assume they're asking.
I don't know. From without seeing it, it'd be hard to tell. But all I can say is that if you have had something dropped on the surface, like a carpet, for instance, and there's been discoloration or there's been a bleeding of the color, then there's nothing you could do about it, to be perfectly frank. All you can do is to carry out a clean according to what your manufacturer's instructions are for that particular carpet, whether it be steam or hot water extraction, etc. But there's nothing really to revitalize the carpet in that particular sense. It's probably a lot more easier to do that on a hard floor than it is on a soft surface. If it's done on a soft surface and it's already been discolored, then you'll probably find there's not a lot you can do with it.
Okay. Mohammed Akil, this is the last question we're taking for this round. Mohammed Akil asks, what is the normal temperature in a chemical store? I assume he means the space where you store the
okay. Right, okay. There's no normal temperature in a sense. I mean, what you should have in a chemical store is the key thing is it's well ventilated. That's the first thing. Regardless of the temperature, it should be well ventilated. You should have some sort of exhaust to remove any fumes, because if you've got different sets of chemicals in there, then you'll build up particular fumes that could be detrimental to the staff entering that room. So rather than looking at the temperature, yes, clearly, if it's too hot, you don't want to be going into an area that's sweltering like a sauna, as opposed to you don't want to go into a scenario where it's too cold. So you need to be careful in terms of how you react to that. So my recommendation would be, first of all, in terms of a store, is to have good shelving, and where you can, the shelving should allow a chemical bottle to breathe from below as well as above, i.e. if it's on flat, then that's fine, because it allows ventilation to go around the chemical bottle as opposed to having a solid shelf. If you've got good ventilation in terms of an exhaust, then that's fine. If you've got a good air exchange, i.e. you've got air coming in and air going out of a different scenario, that's also fine. And that's about as much as I can tell you, really. It'd be very hard for me to say the exact temperature. However, going back to what I said last week, if you look on the MSDS sheet, and I think it may be section 10 on the MSDS sheet, I'll have a look during the break. If you look on there, it will tell you at what temperature to store your chemicals at, and that will give you a clear indication.
Thank you, Tommy. Should we take a break, or do you want to continue this part?
No, let me just finish off just a couple of minutes with probiotics, and then we can go from there. So some of you may or may not have seen in the past 6 months to a year and in some cases maybe before that, you would have seen that there are now a growth in the market for using probiotic cleaning chemicals. Now, again, probiotics has its place in the marketplace, not a problem with that at all. You will find that there's lots of manufacturers that will give you and will supply you with different chemicals for different surfaces and for different functions. Now, I recently, in terms of my own domestic scenario, have become a convert to using probiotics rather than using anything else, because a probiotic really, and I try to give it a simpler term, it works a bit like a bactericidal agent or a disinfectant. So basically what you do is you put it on the surface, it eats the bacteria as opposed to doing anything else. It sort of eats the bacteria, it swarms the bacteria, and then you leave it on the surface and that's it. But again, I'm not going to sit here and prescribe anyone in particular. What I would say to you all is do your research. One of the problems that I'm facing and what I'm thinking about in terms of the future is how much over the past year have we overused chemicals like disinfectants and detergents and sanitizers? Because whereon before, if most of you will remember, in a normal DOC, daily cleaning exercise, the main area for using a disinfectant may have been your canteen or food prep area. It may have been for your toilet and washroom area, but we didn't use them in the office. We didn't use them on people's chairs. We didn't use them on door handles, in that kind of scenario. So what we need to look at now is try to reduce the overuse of chemicals within a certain environment. And again, I am not prescribing and saying you've got to go out and have a wholesale change. All I'm doing is giving you an opinion and showing you the different types. But it will be a good idea to look at different forms of disinfection, different forms of cleaning, and whether it be a disinfectant agent or probiotics or whatever the case may be, then you need to look at it. But do your research. That's always the key to doing these things. Have some research. If you do your research first, then that will make your life a lot easier. If you're waiting for your client to tell you what to do, then you may be giving the wrong advice based on the client's view that, well, I use Dettol in my house, so it must be good for you to use. That's not always the case, okay? So just be careful out there in terms of using chemicals. So what we'll do is, as Shanti said, we'll take a short break and Shanti will give you the time to return. We'll return and we'll pick up the subject on the cleaning equipment, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Tommy. Everyone, we'll be back in exactly 10 minutes. So you can go for your tea break or washroom break. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back, Tommy. Tommy, you're on mute.
Yep.
Yes, here you are. Great. So, shall we continue?
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Okay, we move on to the next slide,
Yes.
please.
Yes. Here it is.
So we've got examples there of surface cleaner, technology protection. Okay, so yeah, just to use this slide as an example, as I said, this is not leaning one way or the other. But if you look at the Steri 7, for instance, who have been around for some considerable time and used in a wide variety of areas, you'll see it kills pathogens 99.99%. Okay, so as I said, if you tell me something that kills 100%, I'm quite happy to sort of bow to your superior knowledge, but it's never always one size fits all in terms of doing that. And again, if you look at the green chemical on the other side, you'll see it's clearly labeled. There's a diagram on there to describe where it's used, etc. Which again is for good for the knowledge for your staff being able to handle it and what they, how they handle it and what scenario to use it in. In the UK and in certain areas of your region, we have chemical suppliers who have actually color coded their chemicals. So you would find that you've got chemical that's red for the toilets, you've got something that's blue for offices, etc., etc. So there's various things when we're using chemicals, whether what we're selecting them for, what we're going to use them for within our working environment, that we pick the best one that's there for us. Don't always go on the historical data. And analyze what you need to do, and obviously there's a cost element involved, which I perfectly understand there's a cost element involved in it. But as I said, in this particular scenario, in this day and age that we're using now, we're not just using cleaning chemicals so it makes things look good. We're doing it now to sort of remove harmful spores, bacteria from surfaces, which we're going to need specialist chemicals. We need to use them in a particular way. So just be careful in terms of you doing that. So next slide, Shanti, please.
I have a question, Tommy, before we move on. Over here, if you see, the Steady 7 is a high-level surface disinfectant cleaner.
Yeah.
The FG7 is a bactericidal multi-purpose cleaner.
Yeah.
What is the difference between a multi-purpose cleaner and a surface disinfectant cleaner?
Right. So that goes back to basically what I was saying before in terms of the surface disinfectant cleaner. In this particular case, I believe is just a disinfectant. So all it does is disinfect the area, as opposed to a cleaner disinfectant, which is a bactericidal agent, which is the green one. Yes. So again, they had to be used in their own merit. They had to be used in a particular way, depending on the scenario that you're using them in. And again, I just reiterate, where possible, do a two-stage clean where you're doing your neutral detergent clean first, followed up by your cleaning agent afterwards.
Okay. We'll move on.
Yeah.
And the next one is about dispensing.
Yeah.
And there's also a video. So would you like to run the video first or
yes,
talk?
Yes, please. No, run the video. Run the video, please.
Just give me a minute.
Okay.
So we'll go back to the presentation, and you can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So that was a presentation from our main sponsor, Rizza Hygiene. And that sort of takes us back a few steps in terms of what I was saying before in terms about training and the overuse or underuse of a particular chemical. Now, by using a dilution station, that will give us an accurate measurement of what we should use or what we shouldn't use. Now, also, if you remember what I said before the break, if you notice from that dilution station, they're not using hot water. There's no hot water going into a spray bottle. There's no hot water going into your mop bucket. Basically, the water is a carrier, and detergent or stroke disinfectant does the cleaning, and that's all you need. If you need an environment where you have to use hot water, you have to use steam, that's a completely different scenario. But again, that wouldn't go into a bucket, wouldn't go into a spray bottle. So you can see from what was demonstrated there that that was heavily reliant on the water as a carrying agent and the cleaning agent to actually remove the bacteria or soil from a particular surface. So where possible, and it's not always possible because as most of you know, that when buildings are designed, they're not designed for us as an industry. You know, you're probably faced with lots of scenarios where you go into a building, there's no cleaners cupboard, there's no running water, there's nowhere to store your chemicals. Now that tells me that the cleaning has never been taken into consideration when they actually sort of built this building or renovated it, what they've done to it. So in a lot of cases, it's very hard to be able to put in a dispensing unit into a particular building. But I personally, where it's possible, it's a good thing to have. Okay, it gives you portion control. It also gives you. It also helps you to sort of make sure that your chemicals are not overused, or even in certain cases underused. And you can cost your operations out based on, you know, the number of portions you're going to get out of a bottle. So when you're coming down to using dispensing as a piece of equipment and the chemicals, they're aligned obviously in terms of the next subject we're talking about, which is clean equipment. So I would always look at using that kind of scenario when it comes to a particular location, if possible to use, because it's a very useful tool. As I said, it's clean. It gives you an element of dilution proportion, which is what we want, and which I cannot stress it enough. That, you know, remember, overuse of a chemical is just as bad, or even worse in some cases, than underuse of a chemical. So this way it takes out all the guesswork. There's no guesswork in diluting a chemical down. You don't have to use any Pelican pumps. You don't have to measure the water because the water is measured into the bucket with the chemical, so you don't have that problem. So where possible, then, you know, go down that road and go down that scenario. You got another video for me, Shanti? The next one,
Yes.
please.
Another video. Do you want to take any questions on
I
this?
don't mind. Yeah, if there's any questions to be had, I'll take them. No problem.
There's just one question from Muhammad Akil, who says, how many hours can we use a diluted chemical for? Like, does it expire after a couple of hours, or how does that work?
Right. Okay. On a lot of chemical bottles, it doesn't generally tell you. So I can only go by a rule of thumb of what I use and what I've said in the past. And at the moment, I'll stick to what I've said until someone tells me otherwise. So when you're diluting a chemical into a spray bottle, I generally say, depending on the scenario that you're using it in, I would say 48 to 72 hours before you dispose of it and start again and put a fresh solution in. Clearly, in a situation where you're using a mop and bucket, well, you don't store it overnight anyway, so it should be disposed of. So mainly what we're talking about here is the use of chemicals in spray bottles and canisters of that nature. And I generally, as a rule of thumb, unless the manufacturer tells me otherwise, I normally say 48 to 72 hours from the time it starts, from the time you dilute it. One of the reasons behind that is because once you dilute your chemical, it starts to lose its effectiveness as time goes on. It starts to break down in the bottle. So it's not going to be as strong on day 1 as it would be on day 5 or day 6 in that bottle. So in terms of hygiene, in terms of removing bacteria from surfaces and stuff, unless, as I said, it says otherwise, and I'm quite open to it. If your manufacturing instruction says use, disposal at the end of the day and start again, do so. Remember, especially in spray bottle, in scenario spray bottles, you're not using that much chemical. Sometimes you're using maybe 10 milliliters, 20 milliliters max maybe. That's not a lot in the scheme of things when you're using it in the ratio to bottle to water. So please, if you're going to do that, as I said, follow manufacturer instructions first of all, if they give you. If they don't give you any instructions, I generally work on the ratio of 48 to 72 hours.
Okay, thanks, Tommy.
Okay.
Yes, we can proceed with the next video,
Okay,
if you like.
cool.
Yeah. Can we have the next video, please?
Okay, so we're now moving into the area of cleaning equipment. And I probably should have said this actually when we've done cleaning chemicals. For those of you that have access to it, I think that the best way to see what's going in the market, what you can use, what you can't use, or what's best for your scenario, go to a cleaning exhibition, go to a cleaning show, without a doubt. Without a doubt. That is the best place to capture information. It's the best place to see something working. It's the best place to speak to people who are manufacturing different pieces of equipment, whether it be brushes, brooms, cloths, whether it be scrubber dryers, whether it be mops and buckets, anything of that nature. I would always say, if you can, go to a cleaning show, because that is where you're going to pick up your information. And regardless if you buy or not, manufacturers are always willing to help to give you information in terms of what to select and what to use and what you shouldn't use. Now, there's a practical element in terms of what we're doing. You're working in a region where it's heavily reliant on physical exertion from your staff to be able to deliver your cleaning. Now, there's been situations, and not only in your region, but also here, there's been particular situations where I've seen cleaners or cleaning staff using the wrong equipment. Either their broom is too big, or their broom is too small, or the head on their broom is not correct for the right scenario. They're using a soft brush in a hard brush scenario, or a hard brush in a soft brush scenario. They're using vacuum cleaners themselves. So you've got your tub vacs, you've got your upright vacuum cleaners, etc. Now, what's right for your situation. Generally, if you've got someone doing 10,000 square meters of vacuuming a floor, sometimes to actually have a one vacuum, i.e. like a Henry or a Truvox or something of that nature, is not appropriate. Sometimes it's actually better to have an upright. And they're the sort of things you need to look at. Again, we tend to, and we have done, and I've done it in the past, we tend to go on historical data, what we think we know best and what's been reliable for us. But what's been reliable for us hasn't always been the right thing in a particular scenario or a particular situation. So I would say, in terms of selection of equipment, and especially if you've got a new contract, if you've got a good relationship with your chemical supplier or your equipment supplier, he or she, in most cases, will be able to provide you with either demos or get a manufacturer to come in to give you a demo. And that's normally the best way to go around things. The worst thing that can happen is for you to buy a piece of equipment that doesn't fit in with the scenario that you're working in terms of where you are, how you're going to store it, how you're going to use it. Is it easy to use? Can you get replaceable parts quite easily? etc., etc., etc. So if we look at, for instance, one of the more popular brands of vacuums, for instance, like Henry, right? Henry have been around for years, very popular, very robust, hard wearing, but it's not for all people. Okay, a tub vac isn't for all people. So please, when you do this kind of scenario, you need to pick the right equipment for the right area. If you've got, for instance, in the video that you saw, you will see that there's floor tiles down. So if you're using, for instance, in that particular situation, as demonstrated in the video, the person's using a broom, that may be adequate. But however, you actually, because of the situation you find yourself in, you may be better off using a wet pickup, because you get into the grooves, you get into the corners, etc., etc., rather than using the broom. Remember, when you're using the broom, for instance, when you're sweeping, especially in an air-conditioned environment, when you're sweeping a floor, a certain amount of dust gets taken into the air. Now it can take a couple of hours before that dust comes back down onto the surface, because what you're doing is you're disturbing it. So picking the right equipment for the right job is the appropriate thing to do. If you're going to pick a vacuum cleaner, fine, not a problem, but make sure it's for the right purpose. What you don't want, and what tends to happen, is that you pick the wrong equipment, the staff are not able to get on with it, the staff will then have a problem using it, i.e. they may have a back problem, a musculoskeletal problem, because of overuse of bending over when they're using the vacuum, because they're down in that kind of motion all the time, rather than using an upright vacuum cleaner. So there's various things that we could use. So we know within our industry we've got various categories. So, we've got sweeping, we've got mopping, we've got dusting. 20 years ago, when microfiber cloths came into being, people couldn't afford them because they were quite expensive to buy. A single cloth was, a single cloth now you could probably buy 50 for what you used to buy a single cloth for back in the old days. But things have changed and they've evolved. You get different qualities of cloth. You're getting lint-free, say you get the microfiber cloth, you're getting bamboo as a form of cloth, ecological and just as effective on the surface. So when you're looking for choosing your equipment, choose your equipment based on the environment, choose your equipment based on the frequency of clean. Yeah, choose your equipment on the staff and how they can use it and how they actually apply it. If you're going to use your experience based on historical data, that's fine, but you still need to make sure it's for the right place at the right time. So do you have the right equipment to deliver what the client wants, in terms of whether it be, and again we'll touch on it when we come to the robotics, is it battery operated, is it cordless, is there room to use cordless, are you going down the conventional route of using vacuum cleaners or scrubber dryers or rotary scrubbing machines, etc., etc. So them sort of scenarios, you need to be able to look at them and say, what is right for us in that particular scenario? Is it cost effective for us in that particular scenario? Because again, that does have a detrimental effect. Are you going to get your return on your investment? So if you spent a certain amount, and we generally will say, for most of you would know, that the depreciation of a vacuum cleaner is probably over a 5-year span. So what they're basically saying in tax terms, after 5 years it paid for itself, then you can start again. So are you getting that? Have you got the contract continuity and the length of contract to be able to buy fancy equipment that that would do the job but is very, very costly? Are you going to get your money back? So you need to look at that. A lot of it comes down to money. As I say, you buy cheap, you buy twice. Because sometimes you're buying cheap materials and it's going to cost you because you're using twice as much, 3 times as much, because it deteriorates a lot quicker because it's cheaper. That's not always the case. So my recommendation to you is, when you move forward in this particular scenario, again, there's no one size fits all. If you can go to a cleaning exhibition or cleaning show, whatever you like to call it, have a look around, sample, touch, ask to see something working, see how easy it is to work or how difficult it is to work, see if you're able to store that equipment away properly and safely and make sure it's efficient. Do you want battery powered? Do you want it manually operated? Again, these have a place in the working place in terms of what we do and how we do it. So All I'm saying in terms of this particular case, and it's a bit like the chemical scenario, is choose the right material for the right job. Make sure that you've got the right thing for the right job. Make sure that your staff are trained to be able to deliver and use that equipment. There's no point buying them a fancy piece of equipment that they can't use or they won't use. So you need to look at that in terms of what you do, and make sure you pick the right equipment for the right job. You know, if you're cleaning an elevator, for instance, you know, you can get elevator cleaners. Well, you wouldn't use, or in normal circumstances, you shouldn't use an ordinary vacuum cleaner to clean an elevator, because you're not going to get into the grooves. It's not powerful enough. There's no brush motion that allows you to get into the grooves of an elevator. It just doesn't serve a point. So, not an elevator, sorry, in terms of a moving stairs, I should say, sorry. So, make sure it's appropriate to choose the right equipment for the right job. Okay, before we go on, any questions in terms of what I've said or not said in this particular category?
Yes, Tommy.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with Rabi's question because it's something that was on my mind as well. In fact, when we were talking about this workshop in the earlier days,
Yeah.
The topic of Kentucky mops came up, and there are a lot of people who talk about how they're the worst thing to use for floor cleaning nowadays. So, what is your opinion on that? Number one, and number two is, as Rabi asks, can we take or consider that Kentucky mops are fading away from the market, and what is the best alternative in its place?
Right. Okay. No, I can't honestly, because I have no scientific data to say that the use of Kentucky mops have reduced in the last year or 2 years or whatever. I have no evidence on that whatsoever. What I can say is that the use of Kentucky mops in a lot of cases have been used wrong. So for those of you that are experienced will know that Kentucky mops come in different weights, different sizes. So do ringers on mop buckets. And what you tend to find is that the mop bucket or the mop ringer and the mop head do not marry up. They're not the right size. So you can't get enough pressure to squeeze the mop out, or the mop's too big for the ringer, whereon you can't get enough pressure to squeeze the mop out either. So you have to take each case on its own merit. Now, my personal choice is, I prefer in certain cases where appropriate to use a flat mop and a flat mop which can be rewashed and reused. Now, if we looked at the floor surface that was in the video, you will see that it's a tiled floor. Now, yes, if you imagine you've got a flat mop, it will run over that surface, but it won't get into the grooves. So you need something else to look at. So in terms of whether to use a Kentucky mop or a flat mop, my preference has always been a flat mop. But as I said, that doesn't mean that a Kentucky mop doesn't have its place in the market. Again, we need to look at how many Kentucky mops are you going to buy against a flat mop? Have you got facilities to wash out the flat mop, as opposed to using a Kentucky mop once and disposing of it? You can actually have washable Kentucky mops, but again, to be able to do that, you're going to need a particular washing machine. They shouldn't really be washed in a domestic washing machine. They should be washed in an industrial because they're heavier. They put a lot of strain on the drum. So there's various things you need to look at. So if Rabi is asking my personal point of view is to use a flat mop, and where appropriate, I will then follow up by using a Kentucky mop if necessary.
Thanks, Tommy. Vanessa Mayuga asked about mopping again. She says that, do you have any suggestion to keep the floor dry after wet mopping? Is it dry mopping? Is that the best way, especially in a public toilet? And does proper ventilation help to dry the floor, especially for a public toilet?
Right. Okay. So I'll take it back in reverse. Ventilation always helps. What you don't want is too much ventilation, because what you want is a bit of dwell time for the chemical to work if you're mopping a floor surface. So you don't want it like you don't want a fierce extraction system which literally dries the floor as you put in the water on the floor. That's not going to work. So yes, ventilation will help always in every case. Secondly, what's the first question, Shanti? Sorry.
It was about how do you keep the floor dry after wet mopping?
Right,
Is
okay.
dry mopping the best way?
Okay. So if you, let me take it in a slightly different way. If you're finding that your floor is still wet, excessively wet after mopping, there's a couple of reasons. One, you're putting too much water on the floor, depending on the water system you're using. So if it's more likely to do that if you're using a Kentucky mop or a dolly mop as opposed to a flat mop, or you haven't got the right ventilation for that particular area. So I would look at the ventilation, what kind of ventilation you've got, and secondly, I would look at the technique you're using to actually mop the floor. Are you using the right mop? Is the mop right for the wringer? Is the wringer the right size? Is the operative squeezing the mop out? Again, the size and the strength of the operative does make a difference as to whether he or she can squeeze the mop out dry or not. That's a consideration to take into account. So there's various factors.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Yeah, that's all about the questions that we have right now.
Can we move on to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Okay, so so the picture here is giving you an example again in terms of what can be used and what you can use in certain situations. So you've got auto scrubber dryers, which we will come to of the sorts when we talk about robotics. And then we've got here we've got a wet and dry vacuum, which again should be used in an appropriate scenario. So a wet and dry vacuum, going back to the previous question, can be used in a situation where you need to force dry a floor, as opposed to just using a squeegee. But again, you have to make sure that you've got enough room to be able to use the wet and dry pickup. You need to be able to make sure that you haven't got too much traffic, i.e. too many bodies walking around you when you're trying to use the wet pickup. And again, the wet pickup shouldn't be used on its own just as a cleaner. So if you're going to clean a floor, you need to mop the floor first of all. If you want to then use a wet and dry pickup to finish it off, not a problem. But if you're just using the wet and dry pickup as a means of controlling a damp area, i.e. a toilet area or shower area, that's also fine. But remember, that's not just for cleaning, it's just for removing excessive soil from the floor. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we got here again, got an example for those of you that are new to the industry and looking at this kind of stuff. You've got an example of a cleaning cart or cleaning trolley where you put everything on. Again, these types of equipment, and if you look from the back to the front, is probably about 1.5 meters. Now, it's perfectly fair to say that it wouldn't be appropriate to buy a trolley and a mopping system of that nature where you haven't got anywhere to store it. Your clients don't want to see it, right? Your bosses surely don't want to see it hanging around the building. It's got to be locked in the cupboard. So you have to make sure you've got enough room to do that. So there's, different strokes for different folks. But this is just an example. Again, this is not an endorsement of what should or shouldn't be used. This is an example of a cleaning cart, which will hold most of what you will need to carry out your daily functions, as opposed to, on the front, you can't really put a vacuum cleaner on it, but this is for mopping, for wet mopping. So after you've done your prep, etc. So this is just an example that we put on here to show you. Okay, next one. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and don't want you all to get overexcited, because I'm not going to recommend any particular robots or anything of that nature. So we're going to play you a short video to give you an example for those of you that are not familiar with robotics, and I'm going to then talk to you briefly about the pros and cons of using robotics. Okay, Shanti, if I show the video.
Yes. Can we have the video, please?
Okay,
Yes, sorry, we'll get the presentation
that's
ready.
all right. No problem. No
Yeah.
problem. Okay, so we'll just look at robotics in terms of, and for the majority of what we're having to say here, the three main areas in terms of robotics are scrubber drying, vacuuming, and sweeping. But if we just look at the whole scenario in the round, so what are the pros and cons of using robotics within a workplace? Well, if we look at the pros first of all, uh, clearly it looks very professional in terms of delivering an outcome. Um, when you're actually sort of doing a floor, it takes, it will take take away the manpower element of it all. It'll take away the strain from that person having to mop a floor, etc., or sweep a particular floor. So robotics has its place in the workplace. Now, I'm going to give you an example, and I won't say where it is, but some years ago, about 4 years ago, I was in the region, and the client wanted to have a demonstration on a scrubber dryer, and the guys bought in, the salesperson bought in the scrubber dryer, which was quite heavy, quite big, and quite bulky compared to now. There's the models have really slimmed down and they're not as weighty as they used to be. And he set it up, which was great, fine, no problem, done exactly what it says on the tin. It scrubbed and it dried the floor. However, there's a couple of problems really. One was the cost, which was the burden was going to be bared by the contractor. And the second thing was its ability to get in corners. So you still need an element of human intervention. Now, the reason why, and if some of you understand, the reason why these pieces of equipment don't go right up to the corners, don't go right up to the skirting, because it's deemed that people do not walk along that particular surface, so it's less dirty, which is a fact. Okay, but however, eventually it will need to be cleaned. Now, in terms of their costs, they're not that cheap, and you have to weigh that up against your contract value. You have to weigh that up in terms of, in my particular personal circumstance, if you've got a contract or you've won a contract and you've put this in as part of your innovation that you're going to deliver, and you've costed it in, that's fine. If you're looking at doing this midstream through contract, then I would probably be a little bit more wary, in the sense that, remember, you're going to burden the cost and they're not cheap. So if I give an example, and I apologize, I haven't done the conversion rate, a company that I know, a colleague, they purchased a particular type of machine, which is similar to one you saw in the video, and it cost them 25,000 sterling for this particular machine. So I looked at and done the calculations and thought, well, how much can you actually get out of this in terms of a contract life? Now, you have to divide that 25,000 by an hourly rate that you're going to pay for your operatives. So that's your first point per port of call. You're then going to have to look at the maintenance charge, because it needs to be maintained. Not very often, maybe once a year, etc. You need to look at that in terms of a particular charge, and you've got your initial outlay. So £25,000 is a lot of money to try and to recuperate on a particular contract. So you need to look at it that way. So what's the other pros in terms of using it? Well, obviously it's labor efficient, and it will cover a surface a lot quicker than a human. Only in the cases of sweepers and scrubber dryers. Not the same for vacuum cleaners, because a vacuum cleaner, a robotic vacuum cleaner, is a lot slower, and in my personal opinion is not as efficient as a human. That's only my personal opinion. They are simple to use, in terms of, once you set it all up, it's quite easy to use. You let it run on its own, and they're very, very good to use in large areas. So sports halls, hospitals with large areas, airports, places of that nature, where you've got a large area which is generally free from furniture. They are very, very useful to use. Okay, They are also useful and most useful to use when there's not a lot of traffic around, i.e. human traffic. So in certain cases, it'd be a good thing to use them in the evening or at night, and they can run for quite a long time. In terms of their overall use, they're fairly agile to use. As I said, the only thing is they can't really get right into corners. And clearly, as demonstrated in the video just now, they will go around furniture. So there's still an element of human intervention to clean the surrounding area around them chairs and them tables. Whether you remove them from the area or whether somebody comes in and cleans that area manually, then there's limitations in terms of that scenario. The other pro is time it takes for you to do a job. So the time it takes for you to do a human to do that job as opposed to the machine, then is comparable, and it's quite legitimate for me to say that to use a robotic scrubber dryer is going to be a lot quicker than to use human intervention. However, part of the cons in using something like that is, and I've always said for years, it's a bit like using a battery operated car nowadays. The problem is that the time it takes you to charge your machine as opposed to the actual runtime. So again, if you're deciding and you're thinking of going down that road and using robotics, what you need to look at is the runtime. So in some cases, now the piece of equipment I alluded to before, the runtime for it was around 4 hours, but it actually took like 6 hours to charge. Now, for obvious reasons, that is not going to give you any form of advantage if you're going to go out in the marketplace. However, the one that my client bought recently, the runtime is 3 hours and the charge time is 1.5 hours. So it's quite comfortable to say that during a normal night shift, that machine should be able to run very comfortably and at least recharge once before you'd have to pack it away for the rest of the day. Now, the only other thing that I would say in terms of looking at this in terms of a negative is the setup. So it has to be set up. What you don't do, you don't just put it on the floor and just point it in the right direction. What you have to do is you have to set it up. So you have to set up the room, the type of surface it's on, where you want it to clean. You have to tell it that, give it that information. So you've got time to, you have to set it up. So as I said, it's not a situation where you can set it up to use a third floor and then you take it and you could do it on the ground floor. No, it doesn't work that way. If you've got floors that are symmetrical and they're the same all the way up apart from the furniture, it's quite easy to do. So they will have to be set up depending on the type of location, where it is, the time that you're going to use it. Now, as I said before, I'm a fan of robotic cleaning in this shape and form, but we have to be very careful about what we do, how much it's going to cost, and how it's used. So, and say, remember, battery life is a problem in terms of how long does it take to charge as opposed to how long it's going to take you to use it. So, you know, please remember, if you've got something that's going to take as long or longer to charge than what you can actually use, then you have to ask yourself, well, what's the point of me buying it? I wouldn't buy it because the battery life is not that long. So so going back, the model that was demonstrated in the video just now, I perfectly admit it's got an extra feature on that I never thought of and I've never seen before, where it actually goes around and sprays door handle for you. Now again, if you're doing that and it's done by a robot, how much time would it have taken you to get an operative to do that? And would the operative do it properly? So when you're looking at stuff of that nature, you can see that this has a place in the marketplace in terms of what it's used, how it's used, where it's used against human intervention. There is always going to be, when they say robotics, actually what we should mean in this particular case, in most cleaning cases, is cobotics, because you've got your robot that's doing the actual the majority of the work, and you've got the operative who has to do some of the intricate parts of the work in between crevices, under chairs, under tables, etc., 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 around pillars. That needs to be done. So when you're selecting your robotic machine, please treat it like any other piece of equipment. Get demos, get different companies to come in and show you their wares. They'll be delightful to do it, because at the end of the day, if they're going to get a sale, they're going to be happy to do it. Say, treat it like buying a car. Look at it. Look at what it looks like, what it feels like, how heavy is it, where can I store it, what does it actually do? Does it, will it function like the one in the video? Will it disinfect door handles, which is a plus point if you've got a long corridor and you've got like 50, 60 door handles to do. So, you need to look at that kind of scenario. Then you need to obviously look at your return on your investment. Are you going to get your money back in terms of contract value? Or are you just using this as a tool to sort of win other work? I use it as a tool to show off to your clients, which for me probably is the wrong way of going around things, because it's quite a costly experience. So in terms of robotics, maybe I've said what you want to hear, maybe I've not said what you want to hear, but this is my personal point of view in terms of how it works. And I'm not endorsing any particular piece of equipment because I don't have that experience to be able to do that, but I've seen them operate. I've seen the different types of machines that are out there, but they need to be costed properly. So before you go out into the marketplace, are there any questions related to what I've said or not said? Shanti.
Sorry. So
I lost you for a while, Shanti. Is all right.
yeah, because I had some internet issues, but I'm back. And we don't have very many questions, guys. If you all have any questions on robotics, please send them in, because this is the last slide for this session. But we have one question, Tommy, from Noel Gonzaga, who asks, we would like to introduce the use of microfiber mops in all our floor surfaces in hospitals.
Yeah.
What kind of surfaces do you recommend to use Kentucky mops?
What Kentucky microfiber mops, or just ordinary microfiber mops? Well, let me just go back. I hope I'll give a definitive answer. Right. So before you choose any mopping system to use in a hospital environment, or healthcare environment, or a gymnasium environment, or a food care environment, make sure that you've got the right facilities to wash your mops and your cloths. There is no point going out there and spending all that money on the fancy equipment. You've got nowhere to wash them. So make sure, first of all, that you've got the facilities to be able to wash your mops and your cloths. That will be the success in terms of selecting the right cloths, the right mops to do a particular job. Okay? If you're in a situation where you haven't got that, then you need to rethink. Because remember, although the floor surface is not the main constituent or the main conduit to spreading viruses and bugs, it still needs to be cleaned, and your clients want to see you clean it professionally. Now, the worst thing that could ever happen is for you to clean that floor with a dirty mop to start with, or a dirty smelly mop. And so hence, when it comes to that kind of environment, I would always use a flat mop if possible. But please, when you do that, make sure that you have the facilities to make sure that you can clean your mops properly.
Yes. We have a question about robotic sanitizer machines.
Yeah.
Michael Williamson.
Okay.
I'm assuming, Michael, you're talking about whether there is some kind of machine that exists that sanitizes and is a robot. But I think it is because a lot of robotic cleaners do have a disinfection system and a spray system, right?
Right. Not all of them. Not all of them go down that road. Especially, what we've got to remember is that for a lot of organisations at the moment, this is a new innovation based on what's been happening over the past year. Prior to that, most of the energy has been put into cleaning surfaces, either just cleaning floors, scrubbing floors, mopping floors, sweeping floors, etc. Even at one stage, and I don't know, I'm assuming it's still used. At one stage, I actually saw a robotic window cleaner, which climbs up the side of the building and cleans windows. But for most cases, it's all about human intervention.
Okay. Yes. We have a question from Shijit Kotungal, who asks, how to clean a floor, especially white tile grouting? I can't use any bleach-based chemicals, so do you have any suggestions?
I don't have any particular suggestions on what chemical you can use. and it's probably the word bleach sort of like raises the hairs on the back of my head, even though I haven't got much hair anyway. The problem with the bleach base, it does what it says. All it does is bleaches it. It doesn't remove. It just colors it a different color. So there are probably there are manufacturers out there that probably will have something that will remove, but what you will find is that if the floor is quite old, if the floor has been mopped several times with dirty water, etc., in some cases, not all cases, you will find it very, very difficult to clean the grout because what's happened is the dirt and the water has been ingrained into the grout.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. Guys, if you'll have any more questions, I shall give you 30 seconds to put them up because we're already out of time. Will bicarb and white vinegar clean gout is what Michael asks.
Bicarb and vinegar.
Yeah.
In certain cases, obviously white vinegar, not brown.
Yeah.
It might do. Again, the old method, some of the old methods are the best methods. So, you know, if you've got things like bicarb, if you've got things like if you're using vinegar on certain surfaces, that's fine. But again, you have to think about what happens at the end, you know, that you have to think about in terms of the smell and that kind of scenario. So yes, it does have its place. And you will find that in certain cases, a lot of your cleaners will have an element of acetic acid in it, which is what vinegar is. And yes, it will help, but I wouldn't use it on a daily basis in its raw form.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Okay, so Brian asks, what is the best way to sanitize our hands? Well, what is best to use to sanitize our hands, especially washing our hands properly, because some alcohols are harsh for the skin?
Yeah, again, skin management is crucial, and you have to evaluate that. I quite frankly, what I do now is I use a probiotic hand washer to wash my hands because I find it's got less harsh chemicals in it, because my hands, especially if you're in a scenario where you're washing your hands a lot, then what you're doing is by using harsh soap, you're taking the oils out of your hands, which dry your hands out. So I tend to use a probiotic soap and cleanser on my hands at the moment. I very, very rarely use a hand sanitizer, but I use it if I'm, you know, if it's a desperate scenario, like I'm on public transport or something like that, I'd use a hand sanitizer, but I don't use it as a rule on a day-to-day basis. And also you have to remember that your cleaning operatives, they should be wearing gloves most of the time anyway. So there's no need for them to be using a sanitizer on their hands. What they should do is wash their hands, dry their hands thoroughly, and then put on their gloves. Don't use a hand sanitizer and then put gloves on.
Thank you so much, Tommy. Okay, we have a question about high-rise robotic glass cleaning machines.
I knew I should have mentioned it.
Ravi always asks the most complicated questions.
Okay, what's the question?
So he says, hi, Tommy. Are the high-rise robotic glass cleaning machines really successful? What is your view on these? Because rope access is the best, I suppose. So what's your take?
Right, okay. My take on it, again, is horses for courses. I must admit that when I first saw them, I haven't seen many being used since, to be perfectly frank. I don't know why. So I couldn't honestly put my hand on my heart and say, yeah, that's the way to go, because I haven't seen them use that regular. So I will, if it was down to me at the moment, my first choice would be the conventional methods, using rope access or whatever the case may be. And then if I thought it was appropriate and if I thought that it was going to work, yes, you can consider using robotics. But again, you have to consider how many times you're going to use it. You know, it's not a scenario where you're going to use it every day. So, you know, is it going to be cost effective for you to buy a robotic window cleaner? I don't know.
Great. Thank you so much, Tommy. I think they're done with the questions as well.
Okay, cool.
So guys, this is the end of the third session for this workshop. Thank you so much for attending it. And just to give you an update, session 4 is going to be held on the 1st of March, the same time. And we're going to be talking about contracts, KPIs, auditing, and we're also going to talk about the big COVID-19 infection control practices and protocols. And we can answer all your questions on COVID-19. So get ready with your questions, and we'll see you on March 1st.
Okay, thank you very much and have a good week.
Thanks, Tommy. You too. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.